allocate enough time on these podcasts to give you content that is rich and powerful and meaningful and life-changing and sometimes totally irrelevant. But we only have 20 or so minutes to do that. And so Mark and I, we actually enjoy each other. We're two introverts. And so we enjoy talking to each other and sometimes not talking to each other. But the times in between the podcasts are, one of these days we're going to do a between the podcast. It's just that at this point, I don't think anything can be made public.
Not until we're ready to fully retire, and then we could do it.
I'm trying. It's not that we are immoral or maybe a little bit inappropriate, but
maybe a little inappropriate.
We tell stories about real life stories about what's happening with our grandchildren or something like that, and sometimes there's details that you just don't put on public airways, but they're fun. I've loved getting to know Mark and through him, his family. I've only been around Jill so much, and I have not been around the grandkids or the kids, but feel like I've learned the family through knowing Mark, and it's been a joy. The reason I'm saying this is we're getting close to the grand finale of Revitalize and Replant with Rainer and Clifton, and it's going to be Revitalize and Replant with Clifton and others, and Mark's going to tell you a little more about that.
Yeah, the others are Mark Halleck, pastor at Inglewood, Colorado, took the church, about 14 people, and by God's grace, grew it to about 800. But more importantly, in my mind, or as importantly, he's helped replant 30 churches across the Mountain States and has a replant residency, raise up replanters. Mark is a gifted leader and speaker and a wonderful guy. He'll be my regular guest. And then our announcer, our MC, so to speak, whatever, our host, I guess, is Dan Hurst. And Dan does movie trailers for movies nationally. He got the #1 award for movie trailers in North America this year. He does national commercials. I hear him all the time on fast food commercials and car commercials across the nation. But more importantly, he and I went to college together. We planted churches together. He was raised in Honduras. His parents were international missionaries. We love each other. We have a great time. So the three of us, it's going to be really great. 20 minutes, 25 minutes, just like here. Revitalize and Replant. Going to talk about the same things. You can go to revitalizeandreplant.com right now. Just type that right in, revitalizeandreplant.com. You can listen to the pilot episode, and then you can subscribe, because in order to hear our podcast, you're going to have to be a new subscriber. So subscribe to ours, and it'll be Revitalize and Replant. We come on twice a week beginning in April. So we'll have 2 podcasts every week beginning in April. And then if you stay subscribed to where we are now, you will move over with Thom to his new podcast, which is called what, Thom?
Very profoundly, the Church Answers podcast. It will have a new format, and the new format will be, we will do binge podcasting. In other words, you'll have 3 at a time, but they will be brief. You'll be able to listen to 3 in 30 minutes, 10 minutes each. And we call it the Church Answers podcast because we're going to answer a church question. Sometimes the question and the answer will be profound. Sometimes it'll be meaningful. Sometimes it'll be a little bit silly, but we will look at different ways that we'll analyze church life. We'll have Mark Clifton back on. Have him for a series. I can't wait to get this going just a little while and let Mark come on to our new format and go through 3 of these, bang, bang, bang with us. So if you're already subscribed here, just stay here, and the Church Answers podcast will be right here where you are right now. So we're going into episode 292. And in episode 292, it is our last of 3 parts on why we have hope for revitalizing churches. And if you didn't listen to what I said about Mark being the really the purveyor of hope for revitalization in the world today, you need to go back and listen to that. He said God has used him in a major way there. But we're talking about why we have the hope, and we've talked about the fact that it's gotten the information out there. There's the awareness issue. We talked about its increased evangelism, or at least the discussion of evangelism. And one of the things that we've at least alluded to that we're going to go in a little bit deeper detail is the fellowship factor, which means now, because of the widespread availability of revitalization, replanting information, resources, and personalities and organizations, you don't feel alone anymore. And so we call that the fellowship factor. So, Mark, there's several points we could connect on that. We'll come back to that not being alone anymore in just a moment. But here's what you have done. And I know you haven't been by yourself doing this, but You have to take God has used you in a major way, and you have to take a lot of credit for you. You have moved the discussion of revitalization dramatically from losing to recovering. You're talking about what can happen for the glory of God, which of course is what you write about, instead of all the bad news that has happened. So you've changed the discussion from losing to recovering. And I don't know if you can recover yourself after I've said all those platitudes for you and about you, but that's the reality of what you've done, Mark.
Well, I think all of our stories are stories of redemption and from losing to recovering. And I know in my own life, it's a huge story of that. Boy, imperfect in every possible way, and a failure in so many ways in terms of what I should be for Christ and how I should behave and how I should live my life. And yet all of that becomes a platform to display his grace. And so I've learned a lot in my own personal life that God takes our messes, and if we'll leave them to him, he can make something really beautiful out of them. And if he does that in our own personal lives, he can do that in your church. And I was at a conference recently where there were 3 or 4 speakers on revitalization, and they were all very Christ-centered, cross-centered, hope-centered. And then one dear brother gets up there and just talks about all the junk going on in dying churches and all the mean things people do to each other and all. And it was just like, yeah, we know that. We don't need to be beat over the head with that. I mean, sometimes you need to raise the issue and say, here's what it is. But we get down there and we live in that. There's no hope in that. Your book says it all. Your book, Anatomy of a Revived Church. I love that book. I use it all the time when I teach. And listen, they're all important. Every point in there is important. But to me, the most important one is they quit blaming other things and other people. And you've got to move beyond that. We got terrible leaders. Oh, we have a terrible reputation. Oh, the other churches. Oh, we had somebody embezzle money. We had a pastor have an affair. All those things are true, but that's not going to help you get beyond where you need to be. And Jesus is greater than all of those things. And when you just talk about them all the time, you're basically saying Jesus isn't greater than these things. And really, the deeper the pit you're in, the more of God's grace you'll experience to fill it up. So, yeah, that's how I view it. And it becomes Spurgeon said, would that my infirmities, and he had a lot of them, physical and emotional and mental, would that my infirmities would be a platform on which to display the grace of God. And the first time I read that from Spurgeon, I thought, would that these dying churches would be a platform on which to display the grace of God, not something to run from or to try to hide or cover up or bury or apologize for, but to say, here is a place where people can say, only God could have done that. And that's what I see in a dying church.
And you did it again, Mark. You did it again. You demonstrated once again why you are the spokesman for hope for revitalization in the world, not just in the United States. And in that regard, revitalization is one of the fastest growing disciplines in church life today. It was not even thought of 15, 20 years ago. And now we have degrees in it, and we have denominational positions in it, and we have people who are proud to say, I'm a revitalization pastor. I mean, good gravy train, the way that this has shifted over the years.
I know. I just got a moment ago, my phone rang and on another podcast, it's somebody's wrong phone call. It was mine. I forgot to turn it off. It was a guy of all things. I got a guy he's doing his doctoral dissertation is going to be on, guess what?
What?
Church revitalization. I mean, you've got people getting doctor's degree, and you got seminaries offering, doctoral degrees in church revitalization.
Isn't that something?
1990, there was no way that would have happened. No way in the world.
I wonder what we would have thought if we had heard those two words together, church revitalization.
Well, or church or even replanting. I mean, that would have been really. Yeah. What's up with that? I'm watching YouTube. I watch YouTube at night. I have YouTube TV, and it's just this rabbit hole you can go down, right? So you can put on anything you want in there and see all these videos. So I just put replant in the other night. All these people talking about replant that aren't they're not in my denomination, in my tribe. I've never met them. I don't know who they are, but they're replant experts, and that's okay. There are all kinds of denominations all across North America. They're talking about replanting, and I'm thinking, where did you get that word from? I mean, seriously, that was not a word we talked about 10 or 12 years ago, but all these denominations are talking about. So you put in replant in. Still, most of them, when you put in replant in YouTube, most of the videos that come up are going to be our tribe of Southern Baptists. But there are plenty that are not. And other denominations are using that term and they're running with it. And man, praise the Lord. That's good. That's awesome. That made my day when I saw that.
I love it. Revitalization has also become a call for many leaders. Now, the reality is many leaders had a call to revitalization. I did. I had a call to revitalize 4 churches, but I thought I was just weird. I knew I was weird, but the fact that I wanted to go to help a church get healthier that was not healthy was there wasn't a term for it.
No,
And
there was.
most pastors who go to churches in need of revitalization, I hate to say it, but many times in the past it was, well, he can't do any better. So
I
he's
know.
going to go to that dying church.
Absolutely. And I, before revitalization, you and I are old enough. I'm in my 60s. So, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, when I've been in denominational life for a long, long time, since I was 28. So back in those years, I would have guys that would approach me and say, I've got a ministry of going to struggling churches. I mean, that was, I'd hear that all the time. I just go, well, part of that is because you're a struggling pastor.
Oh, God. This is on hope, Mark. Let's get you back on the track.
I'm just telling you. I'm telling you. I sometimes I'd interview these guys and I'd think, well, I know why it struggles once you get there. But there were other guys.
Cruel.
But there were other guys who would say to me, man, God just takes me to struggling churches all the time. And that seems to be my ministry. And even my dad, he went to 3 churches in his life, and all 3 of them were in decline. And before he left, all 3 of them, I wouldn't tell this story if it didn't end this way, had basically doubled or tripled in size. And so my dad always felt like I have this ministry of going to troubled churches. But there wasn't, it was always, the focus was on the troubled church. I'm going to a troubled church, a difficult church. Now we can say, I'm going to do a revitalization. It's more positive looking than focusing on the trouble. I'm not making that very clear, but back in those days,
it clear.
Back in those days, you said, well, I'm going to a troubled church. No, I'm going to do a revitalization. That's 2 different outlooks on that. And to have an identity. Hey, I'm a revitalizing pastor, so I need to get some equipping in revitalization. I need to learn more about how people make decisions and how wounded people can be shepherded back to health again, and how you can make a church that's turned in on itself begin to be outwardly focused. I need these skill sets in order to work with this church. And I need to learn from others who've dealt with people like this. And so the culture of revitalizing pastors, God uses for us to learn from one another. And frankly, when my dad was taking these dying churches, every single one, or they were declining churches, every time he made a move, I was old enough to remember this. Every time he made a move, he would have preacher friends that would come by the house. I remember this distinctly. They'd say, Harry, why are you going there? You don't need to go there. That place is a pastor killer. They're going to kill you, and you don't need to go there. I think today people would come along and say, if my dad said, my gift is in revitalization, they would affirm that and say, yes, man, that's great. You need to go there. That's not subtle in its difference.
Oh, it is profound in its difference. And that's the reason that we have all this hope, is because we have a number of leaders who are willing and desirous, and since God's call, to go to revitalizing churches. Mark, I don't know if I've talked about this at all. If I have, it's been very infrequent. And let's see, we're on episode number 292. So I haven't, to my knowledge, I don't remember it, but Church Answers has a sister organization, a nonprofit, and it is called Revitalize Network.
Okay.
And we use that name, and the purpose of the network, and I'm unashamedly mention this, and we'll put it in the show notes, revitalizenetwork.org. We have generous donors, those who will contribute, that will, and instead of Church Answers saying, oh, here are the resources you got to buy, we'll say, here's something we can give you because of these donors. But we proudly put the name revitalize, and network together. We're working together to help these churches. I don't even know if you knew we had this nonprofit, but
I
it's
did
been part of
not.
our, it's been part of our blessing and part of our ministry, because we don't want to turn anybody away, and so donors have helped us to do so. We have, gosh, this is going down a trail too far, but we have provided the ministry training and education for 50 people in Uganda
Oh, wow.
that
Awesome.
did not have the ability to go to a typical school, seminary, or college. And we, through donors, we just brought in our second group of 25. We're now training people, and we're doing it indigenously. We're not the Americans coming in and telling them how to do it. We're working through an organization in Kampala, Uganda, and we're doing it under the umbrella of Revitalized Network. And he's telling us, our contact in Uganda is telling us it is making a huge kingdom difference in East Africa. So that's why
Awesome.
I love the name Revitalization. Never told you those things, did I?
Never did. That is great news, man. That's good
It is a
stuff.
good. It is a good story. That brings up this last point: revitalization networks. I talked about ours, Revitalized
Mm.
Network. Revitalization networks have become a place where revitalization leaders can deal with the loneliness factor. We've
Oh,
talked
man.
about this many times, Mark. We've talked about Facebook. We've talked about Church Answers and Church Answers Central. We've talked about the listeners and viewers of this podcast. This is part of the community as well. You are not alone in revitalization anymore, and that's part of the
No,
hope.
you never were, but to be know that you're part of this brotherhood, this family of leaders who are seeking to revitalize Christ Church, man, it is such an empowering thing to be in those kinds of relationships. Like I said, relationships. God uses relationships to empower us, and even in the first century, you see the relationships that the first century Christians had with one another across vast miles with very poor communication. The letters were very important. I love the in my mind's eye when Paul is writing there in prison in Rome and he's surrounded by some of these people. I don't have them memorized, but you can go and you can read where he lists everybody who's with me. Right? He lists here are these people with me, and he lists their names. You know what I think of when I think of that? I think of Paul telling them all in the prison, "Hey, get around, get around." Okay, and he takes the iPhone and he taps a selfie, right? And he sends it, says, "Here we all are. We're all here together." It's like he's writing a selfie and saying, "I want you to picture all these people who are here with me." And then he writes this letter to these churches, deeply expressing so much care and to the leaders of the churches. And then they roll it up and in some way they put it in a leather pouch or something and Tychicus, I think that's his name. He's the one that takes this little letter, and he puts it in his coat and he leaves that Roman prison. Did you ever think about this? And he walks through the streets of Rome. I mean, the streets of Rome in the first century was at its height. I mean, the
Mm.
monuments, the power, the money, the gorgeous architecture. And he walks through this beautiful, just this little old guy named Ichthus with this little pouch, but God gets him out to where he needs to be to the churches, and the letter to the Colossians and Galatians and Ephesians is all shared there. And years later, Rome is in ruins, but those letters are still, very powerful. All of that's about connecting, Tom. All of that is
Mm.
about connecting, not being isolated. And Paul was so passionate about it. We've got to get these letters to these believers. They need this connection, and they need to know that we're all in this together, and we still do. And the great stuff in this world that we look and we see that seems so powerful and so strong will one day be gone. But our relationships with each other through Christ will always be there through all eternity. So invest in those. That was a ramble if there ever was one. But anyway,
Actually, it was pretty focused. You may have
okay.
thought you were rambling, but I was following, which may means that you ramble and I can follow rambling people, or it may mean that you were focused, one or two. But I got it exactly. The we end this series on the hope factor and revitalization. Your hope is Christ. Your hope is that it's His strength and not yours. Your hope is that it's His gospel. Your hope is the fact that you are not alone, that He's provided you brothers and sisters all around you who are a part of the same mission with you. So there is great hope in this. And Mark, you are Mr. Hope in church revitalization, and your ministry has been profound. It will continue to be. And even as you begin to move, revitalize and replant to your own platform, uh, it's going to be exciting to see what God will do. So we'll just wait and see.
Thank you. When's this podcast supposed to come out, by the way? This one we're on right now.
This one comes out March 9th, 2023.
Right in the middle of March Madness, right?
Yeah.
Should be.
Yeah. Usually I don't follow basketball because I'm an Alabama football fan, and Alabama's doing okay in basketball this year.
As we record this now, if you're not on YouTube, you're just a poor podcast listener and you can't afford a device to look at a picture. If you're not on YouTube, you can't see. I'm holding up my teddy bear. Well, my wife's teddy bear. Maybe it is my teddy bear with the K-State Wildcat on it because
All right.
K-State basketball. K-State won the Big 12 this year in football, and they beat TCU, and then of course so did somebody else. But not only that, but at this recording, I think they're number 8 in basketball in the nation. So K-State will be. I don't know why I did that, except to upset all my SEC friends. Okay, good enough.
Well, I'm Mr. SEC. I'm Alabama.
I know you are.
So it doesn't upset me at all.
All right.
So just want to let our listeners know 3 more episodes of Revitalize and Replant. We're going to take those 3 episodes to go down memory lane and to look to the future. You will not want to miss it. I don't know what we're going to say, but I can tell you, you will not forget it. So come back, and with the final 3 episodes of Mark and Thom doing Revitalize and Replant will then air and be available the last 3 weeks in March, and then we'll be moving on to our others. So come back for that one. We'll see you later.